Worst parts of being on the front line. I want to talk about the worst parts of being stationed on the front line in eastern Ukraine. Granted, it's war, most of it sucks by default, but there's some things that sucked more than the others. I actually get a lot of questions about this, so I figured I could make a little video about it. So I'm going to give a list of 3 things. We're going to start with least annoying to most annoying. Number 1 is the constant incoming enemy indirect fire. What I mean is there's just constantly artillery, mortar, missile, small arms fire, tank rounds, always. And the majority of it is indirect, meaning that the enemy doesn't know your exact location, so they're just throwing everything they got in your general vicinity. So basically, at all times while you're out there, whether you're in your safe house or you're actually in the trench line, there's always explosions, some extremely close, some further off, but there's very rarely ever a break in the incoming enemy fire. When you first get out there, your nerves are firing on all cylinders. Just the anxiety level is 10 out of 10, primarily because there's just so much incoming. If it's a mortar or some of the artillery rounds, you can hear when it's actually dropping down, and you really have no idea if that's gonna end up hitting you or if it's gonna land 50 meters to your right or left or whatever. So I notice a lot of us, including myself, when we were first out there, we're ducking and flinching at every time something would land near us or in the vicinity. But after a couple of weeks, you get used to it. You know that if one of these things is going to hit you, there's nothing that you can really do about it. You've kind of come to terms already with that in your head, and there's been so much enemy fire at this point, you're just kind of numb to it. I definitely think that's one of the most annoying things out there on the front, because it's not like, you know, sporadic or intermittent gunfights or engagements here and there. It's just constantly 24 hours, 7 days a week of boom, boom, boom. Some bigger, some smaller, some closer, some further. But that's the first one, constant, nonstop indirect fire. Number 2 has got to be drones. If you've watched anything about this conflict or anything about modern conflicts at all, whether it's Russia, whether it's Israel, you know that drones dominate the battlefield. You got $70 drones sinking multi-million-dollar Navy ships, or $50 kamikaze drones blowing up Russia's main battle tanks. Drones have completely changed the dynamic on the battlefield. There's hundreds of different kinds of drones, and new ones, new types, new dangerous versions of old drones being made every single day. Even drones that don't have ordnance or explosives or munitions on them, and they just have thermal or high definition cameras on them, those are arguably more dangerous than the ones with munitions, because these surveillance drones can see every move you make and are directly reporting back to your enemy. And in a lot of instances, you can't see them or hear them. I personally knew multiple people, including my platoon commander, who were wounded or killed by these drones. Not only are they dangerous physically, but they're psychologically little terrorists. The second you hear a little bumblebee noise, it's almost immediate panic, get to cover. Like I said, that's only if it's one of the drones that you can actually hear. Some of them are so high up and have such good cameras, you have no idea they're even there. When I was in Ukraine, it was closer to the beginning of the war, the start of it, and the only real counter to drones that we had is if they got close enough, we'd try to shoot them with our AKs. I know it sounds silly, but it's true. But I've actually seen now, my buddy Tex, in one of his most recent videos, his buddy's got a jammer on his back, which I'm assuming jams any comms and hopefully nearby drones. From my understanding and the guys that I've talked to who are still out there in the International Legion, jammers are a mandatory addition to any unit that's going out to the front line. I don't know how those work. I'm actually really interested in them. Like I said, those weren't a thing when I was out there. If anybody's familiar with jammers, the jammers they're using out there on the front, let me know in the comments. That was number 2. And number 3, which I'm putting on the top of the list, which is in my opinion, the number 1 worst part of the front line, would be the friendly fire. This was an extremely shocking aspect of the frontline dynamic that I did not expect. There were multiple times where we were fired on by mortars and artillery and actually some missiles that were Ukrainian. It actually ended up being one of the main reasons I left. I said, hey, I came out here to help. I believe I did help, but I did not come out here to get shot in the back of the head by a Ukrainian or blown up by a Ukrainian mortar or landmine. And again, I'm not blaming Ukrainians for any of this. There's just a lot of confusion out there on the front line. Fog of war can get very, very dense, very thick, lose communications, and then before you know it, you're taking fire from the Russians and the Ukrainians. As a Legionnaire in the International Legion, we only operated when we were attached to a Ukrainian brigade. Whether that was an infantry brigade, mechanized infantry, armor, no matter what, we were attached to one of them. And on multiple occasions, when we would meet up with this Ukrainian brigade, I could smell alcohol coming from some of the soldiers. Sometimes there were negligent discharges where someone would accidentally put their finger on the trigger and let off a burst into the ground, or actually into the armored vehicle that we're riding on. I don't want this to sound like I'm shitting on the Ukrainian soldiers, because that's not the case. Those guys are absolute beasts. They are extremely outmanned and outgunned out there, and a lot of these guys have been on the front for way longer than they should be. They're drained mentally, they're drained physically. Some of them, I think, may be turning to substances because of how drained they are being out there for so long. That's really it. I wanted to give you guys 3 of the worst parts of the front line, in my opinion, of course. To recap, number 1 was the constant indirect fire, artillery, mortars, drones, missiles, small arms fire. Second one was drones, which are just basically a nightmare. And the third, and probably was the most surprising to you, because it was for me, was friendly fire. That's all I got. If you guys like this video, drop a like, subscribe, do all that stuff for me, you guys. I really appreciate it. Got some more content coming up. I love you.